Well, it sure feels great to be out and about again.
Oh, fresh air and sunshine.
We've been cooped up. We've gone out to a couple of little events, but only events where you can stay completely away from everybody.
Exactly, outside. And,
with a paper bag over your head.
Right.
And it's just like, And finally, we're free to move about the country.
Isn't that nice?
And speaking of move about the country, as it's National Train Day, it is here. Well, by the time you guys see it, it'll be a few days ago. But we're heading up to Promontory.
Yes, Promontory Summit, not Point.
Not Point.
Not Point, that's in the middle of the lake, but Promontory Summit.
The real point is that it's not the point, it's the summit.
It's the summit.
Did we make our point?
Yes.
It's now a park, too. Instead of the Golden Spike National Historic Site, it's the Golden Spike National Historic Park. And they reenact the driving of the Golden Spike. They didn't last year because of COVID.
Right.
And the year before that was the huge 150.
That was a lot of fun.
So this probably won't be that big.
A little bit smaller, yeah.
But that'll just give us a chance to get up close and personal with the locomotives.
That's right.
So check this out. The reenactment of the driving of the Golden Spike on May 10th.
Right.
You know, it is always fun to come out here.
It's in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah, well, actually, the middle of nowhere is just beyond those hills.
That's right.
There's a paved road to this spot.
At least, yes.
It's a 2-lane, but there is a paved road out here. But we're still many miles from the freeway.
I know why there's tracks out here now.
Yeah. Well, and it just sort of ended up being that sort of random place, if we can say that, where the Union Pacific met the Central Pacific in 1869.
Right.
Anyway, that's how this place ended up being the Golden Spike National Historic Park.
Wow.
Because this is where the rails finally met. Of course, I think for us, the number one reason to come out here is to see the locomotives.
Oh, they're the cutest little locomotives, too. I just fell in love with them. When I heard about this, like in 1969.
I mean, the history is significant and whatnot, but what really pushes it over the top is that they have these 2 replica locomotives.
Oh, I don't care. They're stinking cute.
They are stinking cute. You know, there really wasn't anything out here until 1969.
I could believe that.
Yeah, the tracks had been torn up, and there was a monument.
Oh.
But there was no historic site, there was no visitor center, there was certainly no locomotives.
No.
But for the 100th anniversary of the driving of the Golden Spike, they built a visitor center and they started doing the reenactment of the driving of the Golden Spike.
Which I wanted to see, but my dad said it was too far to drive way out there.
Well, it is way out there.
Yeah, from where I lived, yes, that was a long ways away.
But there's a bunch of locals and volunteers who come out and reenact the driving of the Golden Spike, and they've been doing that now since 1969. And originally, they didn't have the replica locomotives, but they did have a couple of Virginia and Truckee engines.
Oh, cool.
That didn't run. They just had them parked on the track.
Oh.
One of them was the Reno.
Oh, serious?
Yeah, and then they switched them around. But a few years later, I think it was 1975, they finally said, you know, what we need are two actual reproductions of the original engines, and we can do this reenactment of the driving of the Golden Spike properly.
Right.
With replicas of the actual locomotives, which had been scrapped out around 1910.
Oh, really?
Now, the train crews are not volunteers. They're not going to trust volunteers to run these.
No, I wouldn't think so.
These very valuable and somewhat dangerous locomotives. So they actually have steam crews that work for the Parks Department. Would that be a neat job to get assigned?
That would be a fun job, really.
Most of the Parks Department people travel around from park to park and site to site. But if you're a steam locomotive engineer, no, you get this assignment and you have this assignment. Because
Wow.
I think these are the only steam locomotives in the National Park System.
Right.
But isn't it great that they have 2 replica locomotives and then full-time crews to take care of them?
That is awesome.
That is really neat. You know, I suspect that we're not the only people who come out here mostly just to see the locomotives.
Yeah, I think you're right.
I think the reason that this place has the attendance that it has is simply because of these locomotives. But it gives people a chance to bring their kids out and see this very historic site, but also to experience real-life steam locomotives.
Right, a little bit of history.
Now this is interesting. We have a telegraph key here. Perhaps not completely well known is the fact that the Western Union laid a telegraph right alongside the Transcontinental Railroad.
Right.
You have to have a telegrapher, or your trains are going to crash into each other.
Oh, yeah, you have to have somebody send that signal out.
So almost as an after effect of all of this, they ended up with a transcontinental telegraph system as well.
Well, that is really awesome.
Western Union.
There you go.
You know, the crowds are fairly small this year.
They are indeed.
But, you know, somewhat typical of the crowds that they used to have before the big 150th anniversary.
And that was unreal.
And then last year, of course, the whole place was closed down.
Right.
And so maybe the crowd's a little bit off this year just because people are a little more hesitant to be out and about.
Right.
But for the most part, the country's opening back up.
And gradually people are coming out.
And what a great place to open up the country is, where the country originally opened up.
Right, or was brought together.
It was originally brought together, and now we're all coming back together again, this time sans the big pandemic. You know, it really is nice to feel like we're sort of back to normal.
It's a good feeling just to get out and about, right?
Boy, being cooped up for 14 months, and finally we're out doing train events again, and train shows are starting up again, and gradually we're starting to come back together.
Right.
And starting to do things outside of our houses again.
That's always good.
That's really good. Of course, everybody's being very careful here.
Right.
But nevertheless, here we are back out at train events again.
Exactly.
And that's great. Now, 2 years ago, that was the 150th anniversary.
What an experience.
Holy cow. And the Union Pacific had restored this locomotive, 4014,
Oh, the big boy.
Wow. And Ed there at Cheyenne, and the steam crew at Cheyenne, and the Union Pacific Railroad restored this locomotive just for the event.
Right, the countdown was on.
The countdown was on, and then that summer, they drove this train all over the country.
Right.
To commemorate the 150th anniversary of the driving of the Golden Spike. They had planned to take it out last year.
Right.
But there again, they suddenly had to pull the plug on the whole program.
Right, a lot of plugs got pulled last year, but let's hope that doesn't happen again.
Well, they're putting together a schedule for this summer.
Boy, I hope so.
something else that was traveling 2 years ago for the 150th were the actual golden spikes.
Well, some of them are golden and others are silver.
Yeah, actually this one in the front here, this is the Hughes spike, the actual golden spike. And then two of the other surviving spikes, the Arizona spike here,
Right.
which is made of silver and gold and iron,
Oh, wow.
and was constructed by the Territory of Arizona. And the governor brought that to the event and presented it, and that was ceremonially placed in the laurel tie along with the golden spike. And then this one, the silver spike from Nevada.
Right.
That was also here, and then of course the Hughes spike.
Right.
The famous golden spike, the last spike. So we wanted to be there on May 10th at the actual site and at the actual time that the spike was driven.
Right, since I missed it in 1969.
As did I.
Yes.
And so we braved the crowds. There were tens of thousands of people
Oh, man.
that came out here over 3 days. But we wanted to be there for the reenactment that took place on the day at the exact time. And they did 3 enactments this day, but we wanted to be there for the one that happened right afternoon.
Right at that time.
Right at that time. As close as they can come, because
Right.
there were no time zones back
No,
then.
there wasn't.
And so it's a little bit of a guess, but we wanted to be there at approximately 12:30 when the actual golden spike, when the railroad was actually finished on May 10th, 1869. You know, all things considered, it wasn't that bad.
No.
There were a lot of people here, but the crowds were managed well, and we got really good seats.
We did. It was really well managed.
It was really well put together, and we had a glorious time.
Oh, it was fun.
Now, they were simultaneously doing another event in Ogden, Utah,
Right.
using the Big Boy and Locomotive 844.
The completion. At 2:27 p.m. that day, a telegraph from Promontory. Almost ready. Hats off. Prayer is being offered. Chicago replies, we understand. All is ready in the east. Done.
Let me introduce myself. I'm Brandon Flint, and I am the superintendent of the park. Had the privilege and honor of being out at Golden Spike for just over a year now, and I'm looking forward to going through this program with you as we celebrate and commemorate the 152nd anniversary of the completion of the railroad. I'm a Utah native, and I'm glad to be back. Maybe from Davis County, Kaysville, maybe. Hey, look at that! All right, former neighbors. How about some Aggies? Some Aggies out there?
All right, folks, you might want to cover up your ears. Jupiter, 119, you have the high ball. I got a little story about how the Jupiter ended up here at the ceremony in 1869. Now, the original locomotive that the Central Pacific wanted here was actually named the Antelope. The
So after the reenactment, they drive the locomotives back and forth,
Right.
which surprisingly is exactly what they did in 1869.
Oh, they did?
For the same reason, I guess everybody wanted to see the trains going back and forth across the location of the Golden Spike. So that is actually part of the reenactment.
Well, that's cool.
Now, in previous shows, we've talked about these reproduction locomotives. They were built by Chad O'Connor
Oh,
in Los Angeles.
seriously?
And he built camera support systems for the movie studios.
Well, there you go.
And one of his principal clients was the Disney Studios. And the Disney Studios had famously built their own steam locomotives for Disneyland. And Chad O'Connor certainly knew how to construct these two locomotives. But he also hired the Disney Studios to help with that.
Well, that is awesome.
So the original paint jobs on these were all put on here by Disney animators.
Oh, cool.
Isn't that
Oh,
neat?
wow.
Now, the engines have been subsequently repainted a few times, but the mural work here on the 119 was all painted on here by Ward Kimball, one of the original Disney animators that worked on Pinocchio, the creator of Jiminy Cricket.
Oh, my goodness.
And this is his actual handiwork here on the locomotive. This is Jim Bridger on this side of the steam dome. No one knows what was on this side of the steam dome, so he just decided to paint Jim Bridger on.
Well, that's cool.
On this side, it's Johnny Appleseed.
Right.
And that they knew was Johnny Appleseed because this is the side that the famous photographs were all taken from.
That is so neat.
And then there are two murals on the back of the locomotive here that Ward Kimball painted on here as well. And unfortunately, after all this time, they're starting to be a little thin, a little worse for wear.
Oh, dear.
And there's a discussion about what exactly, at some point, they're going to have to redo these murals.
Oh, dear.
And who wants to overpaint the work of Ward Kimball?
Right.
But what are you going to do? They're starting to fall apart. But for now, we get to enjoy the handiwork of Ward Kimball.
That's just awesome. I love it.
Isn't that just so
I love
neat?
it.
It's great that that's still on there like that, even if it is cracked a bit. Now, mechanically, the locomotives are pretty much correct. When O'Connor built these, he made them run on motor oil,
Oh, really?
recycled motor oil, and subsequently they've both been rebuilt to run on their actual fuels. This is interesting. This is a crosshead pump.
Oh?
And the early locomotives had these crosshead pumps. It's so hard to get water from the tender into the pressurized boiler. How do you build up enough pressure to do that? Well, this pump is connected directly to the crosshead and the piston and the wheels of the locomotive. So as the locomotive moves forward, the momentum of the locomotive forces the water to be pressurized to the point where it can come from the pipe here from the tender up through this pump and then into the actual locomotive, overcoming the pressure inside the boiler. And then there's this huge check valve here that keeps the steam from going back into the crosshead pump.
Wow.
And these are completely functional crosshead pumps.
Oh, that's awesome.
And they use them on the train. Now, when the train is sitting parked like this, needless to say, this doesn't work. So when they're parked, this is used. This is called an injector.
Oh.
And this injects the water when the train is not moving. These early injectors couldn't keep up with the demand, and that's why they had to have the crosshead pump. But within just a few years, these injectors became so efficient they didn't need the crosshead pumps anymore.
Good heavens.
Now this is neat. They have Lincoln pin couplers.
Right.
And the only original piece of equipment on any of these trains is the link on the 119, which is actually 1870.
Oh, really?
Everything else is reproduced. And they had mechanical brakes. And for the reproductions, they did decide to cheat and put Westinghouse air brakes on.
There you go.
Now this pump right here was patented the same year as the driving of the Golden Spike, and so it wasn't present on these locomotives, but for safety's sake, they've put them on the backside, the side away from the audience, so that they can actually apply air brakes to stop the things.
Right, with that many people around, good idea.
Darn good idea. I'm so glad they retrofitted these to run on their original fuels.
I am too.
Because the 119 here runs on coal.
Right.
And the Jupiter runs on wood.
Right.
And instead of smelling like burning motor oil,
Ew.
the 119 smells of burning coal and
Right.
the Jupiter of burning wood. You know, for years there's been talk about building reproduction cars for these locomotives.
Oh my, wouldn't that be fun?
Wouldn't that be neat to be able to ride on these trains?
Oh, indeed.
But so
Wow.
far it's never happened.
Oh,
But maybe someday they'll build reproductions of the cars that were here as well.
I'll keep my fingers crossed.
The hopes and dreams of years of the Union in the outmost boundaries of the United States. There were no bleachers there, no chairs, no cushions. As a frontier people, they were not accustomed to such luxuries. They had come, the famous, the unknown, the wealthy, the poor, the laborer and his boss. They all came and mingled with the local residents in a strange communion. They had come to be part of the wedding of a nation. This was the final rung of the ladder, and iron which would shortly span the continent. Then Edgar Mills, a wealthy businessman from Sacramento, a friend of many of the railroad officials and promoters, stepped forward and signaled the crowd for silence. With an official order from the president, all Western Union lines were cleared for the announcements of these proceedings. From Promontory to the country, don't break the circuit. Keep quiet when the last spike is driven. We will say done.
Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the officials of both railroads, the Union Pacific and the Central Pacific, I bid you welcome. We are met today to commemorate the completion of a project which is a remarkable example of the vision, the determination, and the labor of thousands of men in the Union, which this day shall be consummated forever. We are assembled here to link the ends of the earth, to join the raw riches of the American West with the finished products of the industrial East. We are also met today with mixed emotions, with joy that in a combined effort and a common cause, the brains, the sweat, and the muscle of thousands of men have joined together under the guidance of Almighty God. But it is with profound sorrow that we remember and pay homage to the hundreds of men who gave their lives that we might stand here at this moment and share one with another this sacred occasion.
So the 4 ceremonial spikes were simply dropped into holes in the laurel tie, and then they were gently tapped with this ceremonial awl.
Right.
the actual spike, the actual final spike, was not the golden spike. It was just a regular railroad spike.
Well, and I always wanted, when I was a kid, wanted to go out and go see that golden spike. I thought it was still there at Promontory Point, not at Summit, but yeah.
Well, me too. But the last spike was not a golden spike. It was just a regular iron spike.
Dr. Durant has adjusted the spike. The spike will soon be driven. The signal will be 3 dots for the commencement of the blow.
Let's get somebody up here who knows how to build a railroad. Reed, Showbridge. Yeah, that's right. You know how to finish it.
From Promontory to the country, bulletin. D-O-N-E, done.
Now, after they finished driving the locomotives back and forth across the site, they set up to take a photograph.
Yes.
The very, very, very famous photograph.
Right.
And for every reenactment, they also set up to take the same photograph over again.
Which is just so cool.
It's really cool, and then they invite people to come up and be part of the photograph.
In dress or not in dress. Some of
In
these
dress.
people are dressed in period dress. It's so cool.
Yeah.
Now this photo is a great photo, but it isn't a great representation for the diversity of the workforce to help build the Transcontinental Railroad. The Central Pacific hired between 10,000 and 12,000 Chinese workers to help build through the mountains. And not one of them actually appears in the Champagne photograph. So we would like to eventually invite you folks up for a photograph. We're going to stage a photograph with our reenactment group right now, including the locomotive engineers who will be on the front of the 2 locomotives. And then after this photograph, we'd like to invite you to come up and be part of a photograph which will later be on our website.
Wow, there it is.
Isn't that cool?
Isn't that just... And I can't see this enough times.
No, not ever.
Every time they raise these bottles and bring these locomotives together, it's just... It's an emotional experience.
Well, it is. And for me, it's 1869, 1969 all over again.
Isn't it great to be doing shows again?
It is. It's great to be out in the car and riding along and sunshine and it's getting warm.
And I just got email from part of the group that does the show up in Evanston.
Oh, that's so cool.
And that's one of our favorite train shows.
Oh,
and
yes.
Not only is it back on for this year, they're going to attempt the world's largest N-scale free mall.
That should be just a lot of fun.
Because they have all that new space.
Yes.
Where inside the roundhouse. So it should just be glorious. And Ed, we've been texting back and forth with Ed, and they're putting together a full schedule for the big boy again.
Oh, neat.
They've been parked for over a year, so...
Right.
And they haven't announced the schedule yet for the big boy, but they will have the big boy back out.
Which will be fun.
And we're going to do some big boy chasing again.
Yes, that was a lot of fun.
The world is returning to normal.
Yeah,
Wow.
right? Let's hope it continues that way.
Let's hope it continues that way. Well, if you haven't been over to the channel, please pop over to the channel. And if you're not a subscriber, please, like and subscribe and do all those things. And the easy way to subscribe is with the blue button. Are we ready for the blue button? Zoink! Right there, the big blue button. Well, we're not sure how you found this video on the internet. We hope you didn't find it boring. And we will see you here on Tuesday.
Right.
And we'll do something fun then.
Right. See ya. Bye.
Bye.